The massive chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as the holographic display showed yet another star system, dissolving into darkness. The 12 representatives of the most powerful civilizations in the Milky Way watched in silent horror. This was the 8th system lost in just 14 days. Counselor Zizek's 12 tentacles rippled with anxiety as he floated above his designated platform. His translucent body glowed with a dim blue light that reflected his species' natural distress signal. "The voidlings have adapted again," he said, his voice translator conveying the grave tone to the assembled council members. "Our energy barriers no longer affect them. They simply consume the energy and grow stronger." The reptilian representative from Sirius hissed in frustration. 3,000 years of peace in this galaxy, and now these microscopic parasites threaten everything we have built. The microscopic creatures called voidlings had appeared 6 months ago. At first, they seemed harmless, tiny, energy-consuming organisms floating through deep space. Then they evolved, began targeting power sources, and eventually developed a taste for stars themselves. "Our weapons are useless," said the crystalline entity representing the Pleiades Confederation. "They feed on radiation. Every blast from our ships only makes them multiply faster." Counselor Zizek moved to the center of the chamber. As head of the Defense Committee, the burden of solution fell to him. He had spent weeks analyzing every potential answer to this crisis. What he was about to suggest went against centuries of careful policy. "There is one species," he said slowly, "that specializes in eradication." The chamber erupted in protests. The representative from Tau Ceti rose on her 8 legs, her exoskeleton clicking loudly. "You cannot possibly suggest involving the creatures from Sol 3. Humans," Zizek corrected. "They call themselves humans. They are barbarians." "The Andromedan," Ambassador shouted. His metallic body vibrated with indignation. "They still fight wars among their own kind." Zizek raised 4 tentacles calling for silence. "Yes, they are violent. Yes, they are unpredictable, but they possess a unique talent for killing things." The holographic display changed to show images of Earth. The council members watched scenes of humans battling various pests, from tiny insects to invasive plant species. Zizek had carefully selected examples showing how humans had developed hundreds of different methods to control unwanted organisms on their planet. "While we have spent millennia developing defenses, they have perfected offense," Zizek continued. "Their entire history is one of overcoming obstacles through creative destruction. They eliminated diseases that plagued them for centuries. They routinely handle infestations we would consider planetary emergencies." The Tau Cetian representative waved a dismissive leg. "But they are primitive. They have barely mastered basic space travel." "Precisely," Zizek countered. "They think differently. They have not been shaped by our conventions and limitations." The council members exchanged uncertain glances. Humans had been denied membership in the Galactic Council for good reasons. Their application, submitted shortly after they developed faster-than-light travel 50 Earth years ago, had been rejected due to their aggressive tendencies and unstable planetary governments. "What do you propose?" asked the elder representative, from Arcturus, his ancient voice barely audible. "A limited engagement," Zizek explained. "We hire them as consultants, pest controllers. We do not share our advanced technologies, merely the problem. Their creativity might see solutions where we see none." After hours of heated debate, the vote passed by the narrowest margin in council history, 7-5 in favor of contacting Earth. 3 days later in Houston, Texas, Samantha Miller yawned as she stared at her computer screen. The night shift at NASA's Communications Center was usually quiet. At 32, with 10 years at NASA, she had grown accustomed to the routine of monitoring signals from various space missions. Her coffee mug was half empty when the first anomaly appeared. A signal unlike anything in NASA's records began flooding all frequencies. Samantha nearly spilled her coffee as she sat upright, fingers flying across her keyboard. "This can't be right," she muttered, running diagnostic checks. The signal contained complex mathematical patterns, clearly artificial and clearly not human in origin. She followed protocol and called her supervisor, who called his supervisor, who eventually called the President of the United States. By sunrise, Samantha found herself in a secure conference room with military officials, scientists, and government representatives. By noon, linguistics experts had determined the message contained a universal mathematical language. By sunset, they had translated enough to understand its basic meaning. President Eric Powell stood before the hastily assembled United Nations Security Council, his face grave but composed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "at 0237 hours this morning, NASA received a communication from what appears to be an advanced extraterrestrial civilization calling itself the Galactic Council." Murmurs filled the chamber as Powell continued. "They have confirmed what we long suspected, that intelligent life exists throughout our galaxy. However, this is not a simple greeting." He paused, looking down at his notes. "They are requesting our help." The room erupted in confused conversations. The president raised his hand for silence. According to their message, the galaxy faces a threat from what translates roughly as energy-consuming parasites that are destroying entire star systems. The Galactic Council has requested Earth's assistance specifically because of our— he checked his notes again— our unique expertise in pest elimination. Samantha Miller sat in the back of the room, still trying to process how her ordinary night shift had led to this moment. Next to her, Dr. Daniel Cooper, NASA's chief xenobiologist, leaned over. "Pest control," he whispered. "Our first official contact with aliens, and they want us to be exterminators. The council will arrive in orbit in 7 days," the president continued. "They have requested we assemble a team of our best pest control specialists, military tacticians, and scientists to address this threat." General Frank Nelson stood up. "Mr. President, this could be a trick, an invasion strategy." "We've considered that," Powell replied. "But our analysts believe the message is genuine. The mathematical proofs they provided are beyond our current capabilities, and they're not landing, just sending a small delegation to our orbital station." Samantha raised her hand hesitantly. When recognized, she stood on shaky legs. "Sir, in the original transmission there was something odd. The aliens seemed afraid. Not just of these parasites, but of us too. They mentioned several times that this arrangement would be temporary and limited. They specifically stated they were not offering membership in their council, just a consulting position." The president nodded. "Yes, they made that quite clear. It seems our reputation precedes us." As the meeting continued long into the night, plans were formed, teams assembled, and preparations began. Humanity was about to step onto the galactic stage, not as explorers or diplomats, but as something they understood all too well: eliminators of unwanted pests. And somewhere in deep space, Counselor Zizek wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The Galactic Council expected a small team of specialists. What they got was the USS Defiant, a massive repurposed military vessel carrying over 100 humans and enough modified equipment to wipe out a small moon. Commander Alan Wright stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching as the enormous Council mothership came into view. At 45, Wright had spent 20 years in pest control before joining the Navy. When the call went out for the unusual mission, his name topped every list. "Impressive," said Dr. Lisa Blackburn, observing the alien vessel through the view screen. The scientist had brought along several experimental devices that the president had personally approved, despite the council's strict technology guidelines. "It's bigger than I expected," Wright admitted. "But size doesn't matter much when you're dealing with an infestation. The little ones are always the most dangerous." The council's transport vessel extended a docking tunnel toward the Defiant. Wright straightened his uniform and addressed the crew on the bridge. "Remember, everyone, we're representing Earth here. These aliens may have fancy ships and technology, but they called us because they need our help. Let's show them what humans can do." The first meeting with the council representatives went exactly as poorly as Wright had anticipated. The alien delegation, led by Counselor Zizek, stared in obvious horror at the modified weapons and equipment the humans had brought aboard. "What is this?" Zizek's translator conveyed his alarm as he pointed a tentacle at a large tank being wheeled from the Defiant. "That's a chemical sprayer," Wright explained casually. "Modified to work in space, of course. We've developed a compound that should disrupt the feeding patterns of your voidlings." "And those?" Another council member, a tall, insect-like being, pointed at what appeared to be satellite-sized metal orbs. "Bug zappers," Dr. Blackburn said with a smile. "Scaled up about 10,000 times, with some modifications." Zizek's blue glow intensified. "You misunderstand. These are delicate ecological concerns requiring surgical precision. The voidlings are dangerous, yes, but we must be careful not to—" "With all due respect," Wright interrupted, "you called us because your careful approach wasn't working. We've studied the data you sent. These voidlings are consuming entire star systems. That's not an ecological concern. That's an extinction-level threat." The human team had spent the 7-day journey to the rendezvous point analyzing the voidling data. What they found confirmed Wright's first impression. This was a classic invasive species situation just on a galactic scale. "Your weapons feed them," a crystal-like alien reminded the humans. "Energy weapons are useless." "That's why we didn't bring energy weapons," Wright replied. He nodded to Chief Engineer Olivia Thompson, who opened a case containing what looked like ordinary handheld devices. "These are sonic disruptors," Thompson explained. "The voidlings absorb energy, but they have a physical form. We've calculated frequencies that should shatter their molecular structure without providing energy they can feed on." The council members exchanged glances that even the humans could read as skeptical. "We've also brought isolation fields," continued Dr. Blackburn. "Modified quarantine technology. Instead of trying to kill all of them, we contain sections of space and deal with the infestation in manageable areas." Communications Officer Kevin Martinez stepped forward with a tablet. "And we've analyzed their movement patterns. They're not random. They're following energy signatures, like ants following a trail of sugar." For 3 hours, the humans outlined their plan, which involved a combination of containment, disruption, and what Wright called good old-fashioned extermination. The council representatives listened with increasing interest and alarm. "Your approach is aggressive," Zizek finally said. "But we have tried all conventional methods. The voidlings have destroyed 8 star systems in the past month alone. We are willing to try your methods with supervision." Wright smiled. "Of course, we're happy to have observers. But when the action starts, they need to stay out of the way. Pest control can get messy." The council agreed to deploy the human team to Proxima 6, a mining colony on the edge of voidling territory. The colony had been evacuated as the parasites approached its star. It would serve as the testing ground for the human methods. As the Defiant prepared to depart for Proxima 6, Dr. Blackburn pulled Wright aside in his private quarters. "They're not telling us everything," she said quietly. "I've been analyzing their data more carefully. These voidlings, they're not natural. The way they evolve so quickly, the way they target specific energy sources. Someone made these things." Wright frowned. "You think they're artificial? A weapon?" "I'm not sure yet. But look at this." She showed him a series of images showing the voidling swarms. "There's a pattern here, a purpose. Natural species don't organize like this without a reason." "Like a hive," Wright said, understanding dawning on his face. "If these things are like insects, then there's a queen somewhere," Blackburn finished. "Or something like it. A central controller." Wright studied the images. 20 years of pest control had taught him one important lesson. You never solve an infestation by just killing the visible bugs. You had to find the source. "Don't share this with the council yet," Wright decided. "Let's see what we find at Proxima 6 at first. If your theory is right, we may need to adjust our approach." As the Defiant pulled away from the council mothership, the observation deck was crowded with humans staring in wonder at the massive alien vessel. Among them, Samantha Miller, the NASA officer who had first received the alien transmission, stood with a notebook, documenting everything. She had been selected as the mission's official record keeper, tasked with creating humanity's first detailed account of extraterrestrial contact. Incredible, isn't it? Said a voice beside her. She turned to see President Powell, who had insisted on joining the mission despite his advisor's objections. Yes, sir, she replied. I never imagined first contact would involve pest control. Powell smiled. Humanity's greatest talent has always been solving problems, even if those problems involve killing things. He looked out at the stars. The Council may have advanced technology, but they've forgotten something important. What's that, sir? Sometimes survival isn't about the most elegant solution. Sometimes it's about doing whatever it takes. He turned away from the window. Now let's see what Commander Wright has planned for these voidlings. I have a feeling the galaxy is about to learn why Earth never has pest problems for long. As the Defiant entered faster than light travel toward Proxima 6, nobody noticed the tiny dark speck that attached itself to the ship's hull. A single voidling, different from the others, larger and more complex, silently observing. Proxima 6X hung in space like a pale blue gem. Once home to over 20,000 miners and their families, the planet now stood empty, its inhabitants evacuated when the voidling swarm was detected moving toward the system. The USS Defiant took up position near the fourth moon, where Commander Wright had established the operations center. From here, they could monitor the approach of the voidlings and deploy their countermeasures. They're coming, announced Kevin Martinez, his eyes fixed on the scanner screen. Estimated arrival time, 6 hours. Wright nodded. Perfect. That gives us time to set the trap. The plan they had developed was simple in concept but complex in execution. Rather than trying to destroy the voidlings directly, they would manipulate the creatures' feeding patterns and herd them into containment zones where they could be neutralized safely. Counselor Zizek and 2 other alien representatives watched, nervously as the humans prepared their equipment. The Council observers had expected a careful scientific approach. Instead, the humans worked with the chaotic efficiency of a military operation. Your strategy seems unrefined, Zizek commented as Wright inspected a row of large metal orbs being positioned in space by small, unmanned craft. Sometimes the most effective solutions are the least complicated, Wright replied. These are bait stations. We've found that the voidlings are attracted to specific energy frequencies. These stations emit those frequencies but contain a surprise. Dr. Blackburn approached with a data pad. We've modified our plan based on new analysis, she said, ignoring the Council representatives. The voidlings don't just feed on any energy. They prefer certain patterns. I think we can use that. Wright turned to Olivia Thompson, who was programming the deployment sequence. Change the emission pattern on stations 4 through 7. Let's see if we can funnel them toward the containment grid. Already on it, Thompson replied, without looking up from her console. Zizek's tentacles waved in agitation. This is not what we agreed upon. We expected observation first, then careful testing of— With respect, Counselor, Wright interrupted. Your careful testing has cost 8 star systems already. My team has analyzed your data and developed a response. If it doesn't work, we can try something else. And if you make things worse? Asked one of the other council members, a tall, spindly being with 4 eyes that blinked independently of each other. Then you're no worse off than when you called us, Wright said with a shrug. But I've been killing pests since I was a kid with a fly swatter. Trust me, this will work. As the alien observers reluctantly withdrew to the observation deck, Martinez approached Wright with a concerned expression. Sir, I've been monitoring communications on all frequencies and I've detected something odd. There's a pattern in the background radiation. It's almost like— Like what? Wright prompted when Martinez hesitated. Like the voidlings are talking to each other, Martinez finished. Not random noise, but actual communication. Wright frowned. Can you decode it? Working on it, but there's something else. Martinez lowered his voice. I think they know we're here. They've changed course slightly, heading directly for us now. Interesting, Wright murmured. Intelligent parasites. That changes things. He turned to the bridge communication system. Dr. Blackburn to the command deck immediately. When Blackburn arrived, Wright shared Martinez's discovery. The scientist's eyes lit up with excitement. If they communicate, they can be manipulated, she said. What if we broadcast our own message on their frequencies? We could disrupt their coordination. Or we could lure them exactly where we want them, Wright suggested. Martinez, can you modify our transmitters to broadcast on the voidling frequencies? Give me 30 minutes, Martinez replied. As Martinez worked, Wright called a meeting of the core team. President Powell and Samantha Miller joined them as Wright explained the new development and the modified plan. We're not just dealing with mindless parasites, Wright explained. These things have some form of intelligence and coordination. That makes them more dangerous but also more predictable. Like social insects, Powell observed. Ants, bees, termites. Exactly, said Blackburn. And like social insects, they probably have specialized roles and a hierarchy. Find the queen or the command structure and you control the swarm. Or, destroy it, Wright added. The new plan was implemented quickly. Martinez modified the communication arrays to broadcast a signal, mimicking the voidling patterns but with subtle differences designed to confuse and disrupt their coordination. Thompson adjusted the bait stations to create a corridor leading to what the team now called the killing field, a section of space surrounded by the modified bug zappers, each the size of a small car. 3 hours later, the first voidlings arrived. The observation deck fell silent as everyone watched the view screens. The parasites appeared as tiny dark specks against the star field, barely visible to the naked eye but growing in number by the second. There are thousands of them, whispered Samantha, recording the event on her datapad. Millions, corrected Zizik, his body pulsing with nervous blue light. And these are just the scouts. Wright watched calmly as the first wave of voidlings encountered the bait stations. Just as planned, the tiny parasites swarmed around the energy sources, seemingly confused by the unfamiliar patterns but attracted nonetheless. Martinez, begin broadcast, Wright ordered. Martinez activated the communication array. The voidling swarm's movement immediately changed, becoming more erratic before suddenly organizing into new patterns. They're responding, Blackburn said, excitedly. The signal is working. Slowly, the swarm began to follow the path created by the bait stations moving toward the killing field. As they entered the designated zone, Wright gave the order. Thompson, activate the zappers. Thompson pressed a sequence of commands. The massive bug zappers hummed to life, generating a field of energy specifically calibrated to destabilize the voidling's molecular structure without providing them with usable energy. The effect was immediate and spectacular. As the voidlings entered the field, they began to dissolve, their tiny bodies breaking apart in flashes of blue light. It's working, Samantha exclaimed. But even as the first wave of voidlings was being destroyed, the scanners detected something new approaching. A much larger wave, millions upon millions of the parasites moving as one massive cloud. That's the main swarm, Zizik said, his translator barely able to convey his alarm. There are too many. Your devices cannot possibly. He was interrupted by a loud alarm from the scanner station. Commander, called Martinez. We've got a new reading. Something big is coming, much bigger than the others. On screen, Wright ordered. The view screen shifted to show a new object moving toward them. Unlike the tiny voidlings, this was massive, the size of a small moon and pulsing with dark energy. What is that? President Powell demanded. Dr. Blackburn checked her readings, her face pale. I think we found the queen. As they watched, the enormous entity emerged fully from what appeared to be a rift in space itself. The voidling swarm immediately changed behavior, organizing into attack formations around the massive central creature. Wright's expression remained calm, but his voice took on a new intensity as he opened the ship-wide communication channel. All hands to battle stations. This just got interesting. The voidling queen pulsed with dark energy as it approached Proxima 6. Unlike the smaller parasites, which were barely visible to the naked eye, the queen was enormous, a writhing mass of shadow and energy stretching several kilometers across space. All our simulations never predicted this, Counselor Zizik said, his voice translator unable to hide his fear. We must retreat immediately. Commander Wright stood calmly on the bridge of the USS Defiant, watching the massive entity on the view screen. 20 years of pest control had taught him one important lesson. There was always a bigger nest than you expected. No, Wright said firmly. Retreating now would just delay the inevitable. That thing will keep consuming star systems until someone stops it. But your weapons, one of the council observers began, were designed for the smaller ones, Wright acknowledged. But every queen has weaknesses. Dr. Blackburn, what are we looking at? Dr. Blackburn studied the readings from the ship's sensors. It's similar to the smaller voidlings, but far more complex. It seems to be generating a field that protects it from energy disruption. That's why your previous weapons failed, Counselor. The Queen can redirect any energy attack. President Powell stepped forward. Can we adapt our current strategy? No, sir, Wright replied. This requires a different approach. He turned to Olivia Thompson. Chief, remember that project you were working on? The one I told you to leave behind? Thompson grinned. The one I smuggled aboard anyway? Yes, sir. Get it ready, Wright ordered. Martinez, continue broadcasting disruption signals to the smaller voidlings. Let's keep them confused while we deal with their mother. As the team rushed to prepare, Samantha Miller approached Wright. Commander, what exactly is Thompson's project? Something the Council specifically forbade, Wright replied quietly. A quantum destabilizer. Instead of attacking the voidlings with energy they can absorb, it creates a pocket of space where the laws of physics temporarily shift. Is that safe? Samantha asked, eyes wide. Define safe, Wright said with a tight smile. It's never been tested on something this size. But we're out of options. On the view screen, the voidling queen began to move toward Proxima's sun, the swarm of smaller parasites forming a protective shield around it. As they watched, tendrils of dark energy extended from the queen toward the star, beginning to draw away its power. It's feeding on the star, Zizek said in horror. At this rate, the entire system will collapse within hours. Wright turned to the council representatives. I need you to trust us now. What we're about to do violates about a dozen of your regulations, but it's our only shot. Zizek's tentacles twisted in what might have been resignation. The council has already authorized any means necessary. The destruction of another star system is unacceptable. Good. Wright nodded. Now I need your ship to create a distraction. Can you generate a massive energy pulse that would attract the Queen's attention? Yes, but do it, Wright interrupted. Make it look like you're attacking, but stay at maximum safe distance. We need to get close to deploy Thompson's device. As the council representatives reluctantly agreed and returned to their vessel, Wright gathered his core team. Thompson arrived carrying what looked like a small silver sphere, no larger than a basketball. That's it? President Powell asked skeptically. Size isn't everything, Mr. President, Thompson replied with a confident smile. This contains enough exotic matter to create a disruption field 5 kilometers wide. When activated, it will create a bubble where quantum laws are temporarily suspended. And what happens to anything inside that bubble? Samantha asked. It ceases to exist in our reality, Blackburn explained. Theoretically, it gets shunted into another dimension. The effect is temporary for the space itself, but permanent for anything caught inside. Wright outlined the plan quickly. The Defiant would approach the Queen from behind while the Council ship created a distraction. Thompson's team would deploy the quantum destabilizer directly at the Queen's center mass. Then the Defiant would retreat at maximum speed before the device activated. This is insanely dangerous, Martinez pointed out. If our timing is off by even a few seconds, then we join the Queen in whatever dimension she ends up in, Wright finished. I never said it was a perfect plan. Any better ideas? There were none. The Council ship moved into position and began generating massive energy pulses, drawing the attention of the voidling swarm and their queen. As expected, the massive entity turned away from the sun, attracted by the new energy source. Now, Wright ordered. The Defiant's engines roared to life, pushing the ship toward the dark mass of the Queen. The smaller voidlings sensed their approach and began to break away from the main swarm to intercept. Martinez, full disruption broadcast, Wright commanded. Martinez activated all frequencies, flooding space with the modified signal designed to confuse the voidlings. The effect was immediate. The approaching parasites scattered in disarray, their coordination broken. "We have a clear path," called the navigation officer. Approaching optimal deployment range, the Defiant closed on the massive form of the Queen. Up close, the entity was even more terrifying, a swirling vortex of darkness that seemed to bend light around it, its surface rippling with complex patterns that hurt the eyes to look at directly. "Ready. Deployment bay," Wright ordered as the ship shuddered from the Queen's gravitational influence. Thompson and her team moved to the launch bay, preparing the quantum destabilizer. The small sphere was loaded into a special container designed to protect it until the moment of deployment. "In position," Thompson reported through the communication system. "Ready on your command." Wright checked the ship's position one last time. They were as close as they dared to get. Any closer and they risked being caught in the destabilizer's effect. "Deploy now," he ordered. The bay doors opened, and the device shot out toward the Queen. For a heart-stopping moment, it looked like the sphere might miss its target as the massive entity shifted position. Then the destabilizer disappeared into the dark mass. "Full reverse, maximum speed," Wright shouted. The Defiant's engines strained as the ship pulled away from the Queen. On the view screen, they could see the Council vessel also retreating rapidly. "Destabilizer. Activation in 10 seconds, Thompson announced, watching the countdown on her tablet. "We're still too close," Martinez warned, his eyes on the sensor readings. "Push the engines past safety protocols," Wright ordered. "We need more distance." The ship shuddered as the engines overloaded, propelling them away from the Queen. The view screen showed the massive entity seemingly unaffected, still reaching toward the retreating Council ship with tendrils of dark energy. 5 seconds. Thompson counted down. 4, 3, 2, 1. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a pinpoint of intense white light appeared at the center of the Queen. The light expanded rapidly, engulfing the massive entity in a sphere of brilliance that forced everyone to shield their eyes. When they looked again, where the Queen had been was now only empty space. "Did it work?" President Powell asked into the sudden silence. Before anyone could answer, the ship's sensors blared a warning. "Spatial distortion expanding," Martinez called out. "The pocket dimension is growing." Wright stared at the view screen in horror. Instead of closing after consuming the Queen, the quantum disruption was expanding, creating a growing sphere of twisted space-time. "Thompson?" Wright turned to the engineer. Her face was pale as she checked her readings. "The Queen, it's fighting back, somehow. It's using its own energy to amplify the effect. Can we stop it?" Powell demanded. Thompson shook her head slowly. "Not from here. Someone would need to go in and manually recalibrate the device to reverse the effect." "Go in?" Samantha repeated. "Into that?" She pointed at the view screen, where the distortion continued to grow. "It would be a one-way trip," Thompson said quietly. Wright looked at the expanding distortion, then at his crew, and finally at the star system they had come to save. His next words were spoken with the calm certainty of a man who had already made his decision. "Get me a shuttle." The small shuttle shuddered as Commander Wright guided it toward the swirling distortion. Behind him, the USS Defiant and the Council ship retreated to a safe distance, their sensors monitoring the expanding quantum disruption. "This is insane," Dr. Blackburn said over the communication system. "Alan, there has to be another way." "If you think of one in the next 30 seconds, I'm all ears," Wright replied calmly as he checked the shuttle's systems. In the cargo hold behind him sat a modified version of the quantum destabilizer, reconfigured by Thompson to reverse the effect. "Otherwise, I'm the logical choice. I've got the most experience with close-range pest control." President Powell's voice came through next. "Commander, as your commander-in-chief, I could order you to return." Wright smiled slightly. "With respect, sir, you could try. But we both know there's no time for anyone else to reach the center of that thing before it consumes the entire system." The quantum disruption had grown to over 50 kilometers wide and was expanding faster with each passing minute. According to Thompson's calculations, if it wasn't stopped within the hour, It would reach Proxima's sun and potentially trigger a chain reaction that could destabilize the entire sector. Approaching the edge of the distortion field, Wright announced. Starting to feel some turbulence, comms might cut out soon. Through the shuttle's viewport, the distortion looked like a sphere of twisted reality. Stars visible through it appeared, bent and stretched, light itself seeming to fold in impossible ways. Remember, Thompson said urgently, you need to reach the center where the Queen and the original device are. The reversal unit has to be within 10 meters of the primary destabilizer to work. Got it. Find the biggest, scariest thing in there. And park right next to it. Wright's attempt at humor fell flat as the shuttle began to shake violently. Entering the field now. Wish me. The communication cut off as the shuttle passed through the boundary of the distortion. On the Defiance bridge, the crew watched in tense silence as the small craft disappeared from normal space. Inside the distortion, Wright fought to control the shuttle as reality itself seemed to warp around him. The controls responded erratically, and the viewports showed impossible geometries. Space folding in on itself, light moving in slow spirals, and colors that had no name in human language. So this is what another dimension looks like, Wright muttered to himself, forcing down a wave of nausea as his brain struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. Not as nice as the brochures promised. The shuttle's sensors were mostly useless, but they could still detect energy signatures. At the center of the distortion was a massive concentration of power, the Queen, still somehow existing in this twisted pocket of reality. Wright directed the shuttle toward it, relying more on instinct than instruments as conventional physics became increasingly meaningless. As he approached the center, he began to feel a presence, a consciousness vast and alien pressing against his mind. So you're aware, Wright said aloud. Good. Makes this more satisfying. The pressure increased, and with it came fragmentary images and emotions, hunger beyond imagining, the cold emptiness of deep space and the warm allure of stars waiting to be consumed. The Queen was communicating, or at least projecting its thoughts. Sorry, not interested in a conversation, Wright growled as he fought to keep the shuttle on course. I'm just the exterminator, here to close up shop. The center of the distortion came into view. A writhing mass of darkness shot through with pulses of energy that had once been the Voidling Queen. Embedded within it was the small silver sphere of the original destabilizer, glowing with an unnatural light. Wright checked the reversal unit that Thompson had prepared. The device was simple enough. Place it next to the original, activate the sequence, and it would theoretically collapse the pocket dimension, trapping anything inside permanently while sealing the breach in normal space. The catch, of course, was that he would be trapped inside too. As Wright prepared to dock near the transformed Queen, the entity lashed out. Tendrils of dark energy slammed into the shuttle, sending it spinning. Warning lights flashed across the control panel as systems failed. Should have expected that, Wright muttered, as he fought to stabilize the craft. Never met a Queen that went quietly. With the shuttle badly damaged, Wright made a split-second decision. He grabbed the reversal unit, secured it to his spacesuit, and moved to the airlock. Always thought I'd die in some suburban basement, clearing out Black Widow spiders, he said to himself as he checked his suit's oxygen supply. This is a lot more dramatic. Wright cycled the airlock and launched himself into the twisted space. His suit's thrusters pushed him toward the center where the Queen and the destabilizer waited. The entity sensed his approach and redoubled its attacks, dark tendrils whipping through the impossible space. As Wright dodged the attacks, he began to understand something. The Queen was afraid. For all its power, it feared extinction just like any creature. Nothing personal, Wright said, though he knew the entity couldn't hear him. Just doing my job. With a final burst from his thrusters, Wright reached the original destabilizer. Up close, the transformed Queen was even more terrifying, a mass of writhing darkness that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. At its core was the silver sphere, pulsing with energy that was tearing reality apart. Wright secured the reversal unit next to the original device. As he activated the sequence, the Queen's attacks intensified, dark tendrils wrapping around his suit, crushing the reinforced material. Too late, Wright gasped as his suit's alarms blared. Pest. Controlled. The reversal unit activated, glowing with the same unearthly light as the original. The two devices resonated with each other, their energies combining and then canceling in a complex quantum dance. The distortion began to collapse inward, reality folding back on itself. Wright's last conscious thought was of Earth, of summer evenings chasing fireflies as a boy, of his first job killing termites in old houses. He smiled inside his helmet as darkness closed in. On the Defiant, the crew watched in amazement as the quantum distortion suddenly stopped expanding. Then, like a bubble popping in reverse, it began to shrink rapidly. "He did it," Thompson whispered, tears in her eyes. "He actually did it." Within minutes, the distortion had collapsed completely, leaving empty space where the Queen had been. The smaller voidlings, cut off from their central controller, began to dissipate, their molecular structures breaking down without the Queen's influence. 3 days later, the Defiant and the Council ship returned to Earth. The mission was deemed a complete success. The voidling threat had been eliminated entirely. Commander Alan Wright was posthumously awarded the highest honors both Earth and the Galactic Council could bestow. 1 month later, as President Powell addressed the United Nations about humanity's new role in galactic affairs, a message was received at NASA's Communication Center. Samantha Miller, now heading the newly formed Extraterrestrial Relations Department, was the first to read it. The message contained only 2 sentences, sent from a region of space light years from where the quantum distortion had collapsed. Pest problem solved. Send pickup, preferably with coffee. When the search team found him floating in a damaged escape pod at the coordinates provided, Commander Wright had only one question. Did I miss the paperwork? Because that's the real reason I took the suicide mission. 6 months later, as the first official human embassy opened on the Galactic Council's headquarters, Wright Pest Solutions. Galactic Division became the most sought-after consultant group in 6-star systems. As Counselor Zizek signed the treaty granting humans probationary membership status, he couldn't help but wonder if the voidlings might have been the lesser threat. Across the chamber, Wright was already explaining to several alien diplomats how Earth mosquitoes had prepared humans for dealing with any pest the universe might throw at them. The thing about humans, Wright told the fascinated aliens, is that we've spent our entire history fighting things that want to eat us or our food. We're not just pest controllers, we're professionals at survival. And somewhere in deep space, the remaining voidlings scattered and fled, carrying with them a new genetic memory. Beware the planet called Earth and the exterminators it sends into the stars.